Hello, everyone. My name is Fabrício Assunção. I'm the coordinator of the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth and the Joanna de Angelis International Study Groups. I welcome, I welcome you all to our Spiritist group, where we explore the teachings of Spiritism and delve into the first book by Joanna de Angelis and her psychological series entitled The Currentness of Jesus. I give a big thank you to each of our speakers for being with us tonight. They are Dana Sisi and Sylvia Gibbons. So for Dan Assisi from the Spiritist Institute in the US, Dan is an author and gives public talks on spirituality and spiritism in the USA and internationally. Sylvia Gibbons is from the Chico Xavier Spiritist Society in the UK. She's a humanist counselor, bioenergetic, psychodrama, and deep memory process therapist, interpreter, and translator. All of us gather tonight to discuss and reflect on Joanna de Angelis' teaching. I invite everyone to share your thoughts, insights, and questions. Our goal is to create a supportive and thought-provoking environment where we can deepen our understanding of Spiritism and its principles. Our study group, a space for reflection, discussion, and spiritual growth. In this session, we will delve into the third chapter of the book, The Currentness of Jesus, which is called Jesus and Humanity. To start our discussions, I invite Dr. Dana Sis to open the debate. Over to you, Dan.
Hello, everyone. It is great to be with you here today. Thank you so very much for taking the time to join us to read these most wonderful work. I have my copy here in electronic format, and I hope that you have yours as well, whether that's in paper on or electronic format. And to talk about this wonderful chapter, another great commentary by our spiritual author, Joanna de Angelis, I feel like it is always wonderful for us to take into context that which was already addressed before. The way I look at it, Joanna is incredibly intentional and being really brilliant in many different ways. She's organizing her thoughts so that we can have wonderful meditations and reflections upon that. So I want to review that a little bit and just kind of signal to us that she's building a crescendo here. The first chapter we remember was Jesus' challenges. She's talking about the importance of the role of Jesus and how applicable it is to our days. The second chapter, she talks about Jesus and reincarnation, talks about how incarnation is such an important component of our spiritual understanding, especially if we are to consider the laws of justice from a divine perspective. And today, our topic is chapter 3, which is Jesus and humanity. And she's building all those arguments. And she is merely making a case that we can always find with her because she's very direct and straightforward. That Jesus, she begins right in the beginning with that, right? His life lesson is what we take from the gospel as the greatest takeaway that we can, right? It's the idea that we need to deify ourselves. We need to become more like a deity. We need to be more spiritual. And Jesus is the way for us to do that. And you're going to see this idea throughout the chapter. And you also are going to find that she expands on this concept in different ways. She also organizes her thought in a very deliberate fashion. And this is one of the things that I love doing with Joanna. And I hope that in your reading of this chapter, because we do wish that you read that in advance and come comment with us and come explore the implications of that with us here together in this group, you have also noticed that this text, in many different ways, is divided into 4 different parts. And you can notice that because there's a little asterisk between these different parts. And every time that we see this little asterisk, there is a slight change of focus and a slight change of tone. She begins with the what. And the what is that Jesus' life is an example of how we can deify ourselves, or how we can become more spiritual. How we can become this new type of human that is more spiritual, that she mentions that. As she transitions to the second part of the text, you see that she talks about how he does that and how he proposes that we do that with love as a pillar. She talks about the Sermon on the Mount and how that has fundamentally changed our perspective of not to those who are suffering, but also the benefits they will incur in a spiritual life. So she's really proposing that Jesus has shifted our thinking with this new spiritual perspective. And I think that is really beautiful and in many different ways very powerful. In the third part of this, and this, of this text, again, following those little asterisks, we are going to see that she makes a claim for identification, in my view. And what do I say by that? She starts talking about the closeness of God, and that one of the things that Jesus did for us was to bring God closer through that idea of love. That He fundamentally shifts he helps us shift from having a perspective that God was a mean and distant being that just punished us for actions, to somebody who's close to us and cares for us. And that cannot be underestimated as a potentially incredible sociological change for our humanity in general, right? And she also brings this idea of him demystifying things, right? Like talking about the kingdom of heaven in a way that is not full of illusions, but is connectable, and so forth. And in the fourth part of this wonderful text that she brings us, she calls us to action. She talks to us about how is it that we are to take Jesus in, this new Jesus, this new perspective. She talks to us that tells us that if we are illusioned by the systems thinking and the doctrines that we have exposed to, we should leave that aside and seek him in his trueness, in his words, and in his actions, and in his life. That if we are disenchanted with his followers, we should forget them, and instead we should follow him again in his essence and not what other people have told us that he is. And she also tells us that if we have not yet felt the warmth of these teachings and of his presence, then we also need to break these preconceived notions that we have held and accepted from others of impartiality and let him come in. And so, in many different ways, she's really telling us that we should seek him, we should follow him, and we should feel him. And the hymn here really is a symbol for this divine teachings that brings us forth. So, in many different ways, she does this wonderful transition from talking about Jesus as a model for a new human being, love being the foundation in which will gets us there, and the benefits of how that love has brought God closer to us, and how we also need to deprogram ourselves from these perceptions that we have held about what it is to be in the presence of God. And at the end, she makes this call for us to be able to find it for ourselves, to find it all out for ourselves, to not necessarily judge him by what other people that call themselves Christians have done, not necessarily judge him for the ideas that have been propounded on his behalf that do not have to do anything to do with him, because at the end of the day, his example is really what matters, right? And she calls us to momentarily forget our limitations and welcome him, Christifying ourselves in order to achieve our full and total realization. So it is a call for Christification. It is the call for us to think at a higher level spiritually in ways that we have not done before. And it also could work as a framework for us to think about where are we in the process? Have we understand, like she mentions in part one, that he is a wonderful model for that? Are we in part two where we have decided to apply love to our lives? Or are we in part three where we have decided to bring all that spirituality closer to our lives? Or are we in part four where we are actually reimagining how we can relate to God? So there's a lot in this chapter here, but I want to pause there because I already downloaded a lot in my perspective on how I read this chapter. But I want to open up to our friend Sylvia and to Fabricio and to you guys in the audience too. We would love to hear what is it that you would like to explore today, since this is a conversation starter, and where we should go from here.
Thank you, Dan. I think for me, the way I would like to open up the discussion, because when I was reading this chapter, I was trying to apply what I was reading to my daily life. No, I was reflecting on the way I think, the way I behave, the way I act, the way I even believe, on my core beliefs, on my approach to Jesus, and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that really triggered me, and I was really like, okay, this is actually challenging me here because the now I kind of understood. She started talking about in this book about challenge, and that was my first challenge. I realized when I was actually reading this chapter. She was saying, um, we need to what's the word here? Let me just get this. We need to define um, humanity needs to define itself. So I was wondering, I was asking that myself, how can I do that? How can I approach myself to Jesus in a way that is not a Jesus perceived by a religion institution? Because one thing that I first realized I was struggling with that is I had his image when she said, "Are we perceiving Jesus as someone from very distant?" And then she was talking about me because that is me sometimes. How when I'm pray, I'm putting Jesus very far from me as someone that is very far away from me, and maybe I'm not even able to reach. That is my first challenge I want to discuss tonight because how are we actually approach Jesus? Do we still have the image of Jesus on that cross that we are so sinful that we don't even deserve to talk to them, or you have to pay honor or kind of bow down to Jesus in a way that religion might have made us believe so? I want to hear other people about that because that really triggered me, you know. And what about you, Sylvia?
Yes, I think this book is just wonderful. And I was very sort of touched, very moved when I was reading it for some reason, um, because the analysis that she makes is very so real for our lives that we are living now. Man, like she says, man has been uh, a symbol of violence and presumption and pride, and we are very, very much the very same people. We see this around. But then I think each one of us are looking for something more precious in our lives. I think we feel the need to have something that. And in this book, she shows the way. And I was thinking about the question 625 of the Spirit's book, when Kardec asked the Spirit, what is the model for humanity? And he asked, what is the model? And they say the model and guide, then and the answer, the Spirit, is just Jesus. That's the question, the answer, the model and guide for humanity. And that's what he is. And I think the point that Joanna makes here, and she starts saying, Jesus, the man, he made himself human to be close to us so he could show us through his example what we are supposed to do, because from him is changed the whole pattern of life and understanding of the world changed. And in the gospel, actually, this is you can see this because in the gospel, St. John, right at the beginning, when he says that Moses brought the law, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. So we already see that the law existed and he fulfilled the law. Because I think one of the things that's very important, I find, Jesus was extremely religious. He followed the religion of his people. You see in the gospel, he went to Jerusalem at the feast of the Passover. He went to, and his family as well. They are constantly, when he was 12 years old, they were going to the temple. And but he brought this, I think the point that you made, Fabrizio, before, how Jesus is close, he brought that law that's universal. But to us, it's okay that we make mistakes. You know, we can make it better. We can learn. We can make it different. And I think, you know, she says here about being making man human, and I understand that as making him spiritual, letting go of his, you know, the atavism of the past, of all the mistakes he made in the past, and he shows us a way to progress, to move on. I feel actually, you know, sometimes when I hear people saying, oh, you know, when Jesus comes, when Jesus will come, his second coming. And to me, I don't think he has ever left. He's here with us at every moment. And his very words, when one or two you be reunited in my name, there I will be also. And he, you know, what he said to the apostles when he came back after the resurrection, he says, I'll be with you to the end of time. So he's with us all the time. You know, if we lift our thoughts to him, we feel his presence, we feel his love within us. And you know, in difficult times when we are really going through things that sometimes we feel we cannot cope, we won't be able to, you know, we down on our knees, and we feel so unable to go through certain problems and difficulties that sometimes happens in life. But if you just for a moment send your thoughts to him, it seems that you have that strength, that force that comes from his love to us. And he never said, you know, he punished. And one of the points that Joanna makes it here as well, that I thought was so lovely, is that how he used the most simple things, like he used the grain of mustard to talk about faith. He talks about fish and nets, and to give example of work, of a seed falling in different soils and everything, to show the diversity of feelings. And when she talks also about the Sermon on the Mount, which you can find in Matthew 5 and Luke 6, everything he says is for all of us, isn't it? Blessed are the merciful, because they will obtain mercy. Blessed are the meek and the peacemakers, because they will inherit the earth. And everything is for each and every one of us. We don't feel ourselves, I feel we don't feel ourselves separated from him. Every lesson he brought means that he is with us. If we choose to be with him, he will not force us either. And I think that just to conclude here, the point here that I think Dan talked about it, and that Joanna makes it so clear, you know, and sometimes, and we find this quite a lot, people say, oh, Christianity is horrible. They did horrible things. They do this, and the church is that and the other. And, you know, Joanna says, forget that. You go, you know, go look for him yourself. Try to learn from his words. And then I'm sure that each and every one of us at one time or another in our lives have heard things that, oh, you know, that person says they are Christian, but see the way they behave, see the way they do things. You know, the criticism always comes. And then she said, if you've seen that, don't worry, forget them, you know, and you follow him. And it's interesting because in the Gospel of St. John, in number 21, Peter is asking, because you know he was talking about how Jesus was betrayed by one of the apostles, and he said, "What you know is going to be happen to that man?" And Jesus said to him, "If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me." So Don't worry about other people. And this is exactly the point that Joanna makes here. Don't worry about other people who says they are Christian, but they don't behave like Christians, or they don't do things the way they, should be. You follow Jesus. You learn from him. You be the person who be an example. I think this is really good. And here when she says, and if you have not felt the warmth office, break your indifference. Go and try to allow him to come into you, to your heart and to your mind. And he says, in your condition, in your human condition, you need him so that you can grow through the limits of his infinite love. And that's when he says, isn't it? This is sort of what he says in that phrase, I am the way, the truth, and the life. You can go to the Father through me. I think, Joanna, the way she says it, you can relate to everything that Jesus said in the Gospels. And he said, Jesus came to man to humanize him, I think, to make him to a spiritual being and to fulfill him as each one of us will be fulfilled as a being of light, because as God's creation, we are beings of life. It's still sort of being, held within our stone there, right at the middle, but we are being polished to become pure light one day. And I think this is it, the fulfillment of us to become Christ ourselves. It's, like I think Dan said, it's a very short chapter, but the content of it, we could be here for a month talking about it. So I'll leave it for the people to join us.
Um, just we move on to a different topic because we're talking about the relationship between us, that we call humanity, and Jesus. And I would like to hear the group actually. How is that relationship going? How do we actually relate to Jesus better? Because that's what John is calling us. He's calling us to have a better relationship with God, better relationship with Jesus, and it will be interesting to hear other people's experience. So, Ian, would like to share your views, please?
Hello. Yes. I mean, firstly, I'd like to speak about what Sylvia was saying. I think I posted a quote from Paul's Epistle Hebrews, and it pretty much covers what she was saying at the beginning about Jesus' humanity and how he became human to show us, as she said at the end, the way. And the other thing I wanted to speak about is when Dan was speaking about deity. Now, we kind of look at that a bit like Jesus is kind of changing everything, but that's not really the case, because if we look at Leviticus 19, we can see that you are told, love your neighbor as yourself. If you look at Proverbs 25, you are told, if your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. So in fact, the Old Testament, despite having some of the things that Dan described in God, all of the teachings, all of the real teachings are there, because, I mean, Jesus' main message was love your neighbor as yourself and love God above everything. And if you love your neighbor as yourself, you are already showing God that you love him above everything. So, I mean, all these things are actually in the Old Testament. And this is even brought out by Joanna in here, as she said, everything which she referred to is already known. So, I mean, and Jesus was a very religious man, as Sylvia said. The idea of everything is that you become like Christ. So it's an extremely difficult thing for us to do, of course, and we are, all of us, sinful. Of course we are. It's very difficult to do in this world, to become somebody even like Paulo or Peter, never mind Jesus. But the whole idea is very well put by Paulo when he says, yeah, he is in Christ. He says this 143 times in his epistle. This is the whole idea of actually loving your brother, loving your neighbor. And I think this is the idea that we really have to try and cling to in Fabrizio's question. Because although it is extremely difficult thing to do at times, I think if we, like St. Augustine said, if we look at we take a daily look at what we've been doing, we can very slowly see a spiritual change within ourselves that can make a really big difference.
I love that, Ian. I'm going to jump in here really quick because I think that there is a subtlety to this message that I think I would want to double click, which I think is a lot of Joanna's main point. Everything that you said, I agree with 100%. And yet there is a new level that she's calling us to perform at. Everything has been said, but there is a paradigm shift when she says that we need to, right at the end, right? We need to momentarily forget our limitations, right? To expand ourselves beyond just that which we see. And I think that the Christ calls our attention to that when he does what I call the upgrade to the golden rule, right? We often say, do unto others or don't do unto others as the golden rule. But when we look at John at 13, right, before he leaves us, he gives us what I call the upgrade. And he says, a new command I give you, a new command I leave you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And I call that out because, in a psychological perspective, he's really saying, just don't think about what is good for you and apply that to your neighbor. Think how I would have thought, because my perspective is fundamentally different than yours. So I challenge you to think from a Christic perspective and to not just do what you would like others to do unto you, but do what Jesus would have done to them. And I think that the bar raises. And I liked what you brought here because it reminds us that these teachings are there. And I think that this part connects what Sylvia was doing about the fulfillment of the law, which is Christ has come to fulfill and upgrade the law and kind of course correct us and say, all of these things are true. And we want to take you to a higher level where we're not just thinking about how to act based on my own experience, but how do I live based on Jesus' experience. And so I think that is a wonderful connection that you make there. And I think that is a key piece, an invitation here at the end from Joanna. And by the way, if you read any of Joanna's books, you probably know that's almost impossible not to highlight everything, right? Because it's just so good, right? So I use different colors here. But exactly at the end, she says, it is up to you now to momentarily forget your limitations and welcome him, Christifying yourselves in order to achieve your full and total realization. So 100%, Ian. Thanks for chiming in and bringing that connection to the old books and to the new books as part of one big thing. That there is not a denial of the past, there is not a rejection of what came before, but there's a continuous process of evolution.
But also there, Dan, you must, Jesus said himself, he didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it.
Fulfill it, yeah.
So, and it's interesting because, like the point that Ian was making, we know that Jesus was considered from the rabbinic class, even though, people didn't like the way he interpreted the law, because, went against what they desired for themselves. But they all called him rabbi, they all called him master, because they recognized his knowledge of the law. He didn't like the way he interpreted, but they knew so even the most challenging of his enemies accepted his knowledge of the law. And everything, Jesus, and I think it was interesting the point that Ian was making, because if you go to the whole of the Old Testament, to the Proverbs, even, that very famous saying at the cross, my Father, why have you forsaken me? This is one of the Proverbs. So, Jesus was very imbued in the knowledge of the law, but he came to make the law accessible to all in love, isn't it? So I think that's the main point of him. And that's what Joanna emphasizes again and again. And I think one point that, when we read Joanna saying things, we must not forget that she was with him. She followed him when he was saying those words. Many times she was there with him. So she just bringing this into a memory that she was there with him at the time. So I find this fascinating, and this connection of her and him that brings him closer to us, I feel.
Thank you, Sylvia. So, bring Alva to share her question.
Yes, I just would like to share that my journey to sort of find Jesus has been a quite sort of long. I couldn't accept religion. I have never been part of a religion. My parents weren't that religious either, but they tried to take their children to to church, but then it never made sense to me, especially when I looked at the image of Christ on the cross. That never sort of um, made sense to me, that Jesus was on that cross like an image, and why did I have to start building a relationship with that Jesus that was on that cross? And life is my spiritual life only makes sense to me, made sense to me when I was introduced to spiritism, when I was taken to a spiritist center. And then there I met Jesus, the real Jesus, because as soon as I entered in that, I never forget the image of that moment. Because when I entered in that small room in Rio de Janeiro, and the way I was welcomed by the people who were there, it was something that didn't seem to be part of this world, because I felt the energy embracing me, the energy that I couldn't see, but I perceived it. And I felt that energy embracing me. And my relationship with Jesus has always been one that I never accepted him to be on the cross. And I don't accept that he died for my sins, because I, even in this world that we live, that is not perfect, nobody sends someone else to prison knowingly to pay for a crime that someone else committed. So I couldn't accept that. How could I send Jesus to the cross to suffer that much for my sins? And as I think, as I sort of my relationship with Jesus grows, I had an experience that was it was just the most amazing experience not very long ago, when I was caring for someone going through a very, very difficult time in their lives. And I was in pain, in deep pain, because because of what that person was going through as well. And for a moment, I felt I can't do anything to help this person, but I will pray and I will ask Jesus to come and assist. And I did that. I just prayed. And as I was ending my prayer, the person who was going through a very difficult flashback of a past that had happened, that was tormenting the person at the present, it's like I saw Jesus enveloping him with a love, with this energy that was calming the person down. And from that moment, I felt that Jesus is with me because he listened to me. And this is how every time I pray, every time I am at a meeting like this, I know Jesus is here with us because he promised us. And even when I was praying at that time, I was by myself, but he showed himself there and he came to help me with my pain because I was suffering because of the pain the other person was suffering. So we were both healed. We received such healing at that moment. So I think it's sometimes we think that um, Jesus is too far away from us, but is that what you've been saying? We are the ones who need to connect. He's going to act through us. So we need to open this connection with him. And I think it's amazing this relationship that can be built because it strengthens our faith and it gives us hope that we are never alone, no matter where we are. If we connect with him, he's there with us.
Thank you, Limelva. So we talked about how we relate to Jesus and our personal experience so far in relation to our kind of relationship with Jesus. But there is one passage that I want to bring up discussion here, is this part here, where Joanna says, a different type of human emerged from his examples. So she's talking about a change, transformation. And then she said, this new type of human is humble, simple, submissive, and strong in their spiritual eternity. I want to pick it up in the word submissive because that can be very controversial. And I want to hear the contributions for everyone on the group about because the word I checked the translation, I checked back on the original, it was written as submissive. And I want to hear
Yeah.
your views on it.
I love that part because I thought about the same thing when I was reading it, Fabricio, but I think it makes sense to me, at least, how I interpret it. When I read the last part of that piece, which I think is the core of a lot of the message that we're going to talk about, which is strong in their spiritual alternative. The way I read it, it was almost like a new type of human emerged from his examples. He was humble, he was simple, and he submitted himself to the challenges of the physical world because he was strong in his spiritual sense of self and knowledge of himself being an immortal spirit, right? And it became easier for me to hold on to that as she continues to make that case in the second part after the asterisk when she talked about love and about he changed perspectives, right? Because when he brings the Sermon on the Mount, and I think Sylvia spoke to this, if I'm not mistaken, he's really shifting everything we know about perspective. He's saying, blessed are those who are suffering. From a physical perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but from a spiritual perspective, it does. So is he's calling our attention to the fact that we must consider our spiritual selves first as the priority for our living. And that's why he was submissive here, because he submitted to the challenges of this world because he knew he was more than that. So that was kind of like my perspective. And in many different ways, I feel like that's the core message that he brings, which is he shifted our perspective so that we could think of ourselves as immortal spirits when we are here. We are spirits who are living a physical life and not physical bodies who happen to have a spirit. Is a fundamental shift there, which I think is the core of his message. And that's why he resurrected and showed us that life does not end, right? So I love that part, and I'd love to see what else folks think about that.
I think that is very interesting because it's very important, isn't it? I think the question of submissive is not in the sense that we understand. We understand submissive as if someone is telling you, humiliate and you don't say anything. I think it's more in the sense of being having humility. Because it doesn't mean, that's another word that's a bit controversial because you think humility as someone who is, is not much. But the whole thing is the way we see, in the way Jesus says, is that it is a question of humility in the face of God, in what we want to achieve. Is to forget the pride, the selfishness, a desire to be more than others or to be judgmental. I think submissive in that, to sort of crush or let go of those feelings, that's in a way that's submissive. And it's interesting because I think in Paul's epistles, the letters to the Galatians, he says, and I think this sort of maybe I felt sort of feels a little bit what you're saying, Fabrizio, because Paul says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I think this is sort of fulfills what you are saying, because we are crucified in Christ, he says, but yet I live. But the life that I live now, it's Christ who lives in me. And I think this is extremely beautiful. And I think also that it's impossible for us to read the Gospels, to see the words of Jesus, to try to connect with it without being changed in some way. I think if you think about the great martyrs who started the first Christians, well, in those days they're not called Christians, they're called the followers of the way, but that they went to the arena and they were killed, for the love of Jesus, and like St. Francis and so many others, once they integrate Jesus in their heart. And Paul, I mean, the greatest example of all, Paul, who he was would be for definitely the leader of the Sanhedrin, and in a completely different perspective, he persecuted him. And then when he actually sees Jesus in the road, he says, Lord, what do you want me to do? It was the greatest transformation of all. His life was different. And I think each and every one of us have the same example. I mean, Indalva was saying something about this, and I'm sure that every one of us here that is here today listening to this, at one point in our life, something in our life, maybe it's not a total transformation, but each and every one of us have had a point in our life that the knowledge of Jesus, that the knowledge of his love for us have made a difference in our lives. Even a small one, but it has, I'm sure of it, because it has made in mine. So
let's bring Ian. Ian, would you like to share with us?
Yes. No, I agree with what they've been saying. I mean, Dan was speaking about suffering in terms of physical suffering, but of course, if physical suffering nearly always comes from spiritual suffering anyway. So yes. I mean, even your physical suffering is part of that. But I think what Sylvia was saying is really important, because the whole idea of being in Christ, as Sylvia described Paul saying, I mean, that was his whole idea. He left his own persona completely to be in Christ. And this is what the submissive thing means. And of course, he was just following the model. Because if we look at John, for example, you can see that all of the time that Jesus is arguing with the authorities, with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he tells them that he has a witness because he is doing his Father's work. He is not doing anything of his own. He is doing everything that his Father told him. So in that same way, he is the model of being submissive.
Thank you. Severina, would you like to talk to us?
For me, I understand submissive is similar, but maybe different word. I would say, not rebellious in terms of submit to the law of God, follow the laws. And I heard somewhere on the Kardec radio about how important is to follow even simple laws, like for example at school, at work. And often, like in my case, I break everything what I think is stupid or pointless. Then I heard this talk, I'm thinking, they say that if I want to follow God's law, I should start learning with following even those laws I don't like here on this planet. And this is, I think, when maybe why Jesus also, I think Sylvia said he was religious, he followed rules because he was just, let's say, proper person, not rebellious person. And that's why I understood rebellious. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring one more topic first to discuss because I'm concerned about time. So interesting because when you start studying Joanna, she talks a lot about inner transformation, inner journey. And then on this chapter, she mentioned quite a few times that Jesus came to people to humanize them. And she repeat that I think 2 or 3 times in the book, in the same chapter. So how does that resonate with you? How can we humanize ourselves? Anyone?
I think Umberto made a great point too, right, on our group, because what it really feels like she's saying is that by humanizing, she really wants to spiritualize us. She's saying that Jesus has come to lift the bar on what humanity should be like. And I wonder if that's why this topic is called Jesus and Humanity, because it could be Jesus as a model, right? Jesus as an example for us. She could have named it that way. But I think there's a clear intention saying for us to raise the bar of what it is to be human in this planet and rethink that, we need to change our individual behaviors. It takes all of us to do that. And the example is there. And so I really like that. I think that to Christify oneself, she uses that term at the end, right? To Christify ourselves is to humanize ourselves, which is to bring us closer to spirituality and to what humans should be and not what we currently are. At least that's one way of looking at it for right now.
Yes, but it's also, I think, going from what you're saying, in this paragraph, she says, in your human condition, you need him in order to grow, departing from your limits and going towards the infinity of his love. I think, going back again to what he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we, as humans, we need to follow his example because, I mean, we know that he's a Christic spirit. He's the spirit who is with God. And we cannot imagine, we have no concept of the sacrifice that he made, being a spirit of that level to come into this world. And if we go to the Old Testament, from Genesis, or almost every other chapter, there is something predicting his coming, many philosophers and everything. So it took many, many centuries for Jesus to be able to become human and come here. It's very important. I feel that, when he made that sacrifice to become human, so he could show us the way, rather than by his example of forgiveness, of love. And I think one of the things, because, we studied Joanna de Angelis, but she's one of the spirits that we know was one of the spirits who codified the Spiritist doctrine. We have two messages of her in the Gospel according to Spiritism. She was there. So it's sort of reminding us that, and Jesus himself, he said it, what I do, you can do also. You are gods, So he never put himself away from us. In everything he did, he made sure to say, you can do what I do and much more. You are gods. So I think when she talks about humanize as well, is that because, then and now, sometimes our behavior, it's not of a child of God. We can be very judgmental, we can be harsh, we can be rude. And I think she's trying to say, no, have peace, have love. It doesn't matter what other people do. Let them, follow that. They will do that. You follow me, give yourself to me, follow me. And that's the way, I think, the golden rule. And just a point very quickly, Linda, if you wanted to read in the Old Testament, Isaiah 53, will give you a lot of the explanation for what you were saying about Jesus, because it's in Isaiah, everything, he's coming, the Son will be born to us. And in Isaiah 53, he explains everything about Jesus and his sacrifice.
Thank you.
Isn't it wonderful to be able to spend an hour and a half talking about Jesus? I feel my whole house is filled of light, It's so emotional. It is impossible to be talking about Jesus without feeling his presence, I feel.
It's a good feeling, right?
Yes, the best.
Okay. So I think we have 5 minutes left. I would like to wrap it up. So Dan, I'm coming to you for your closing remarks, if anything.
I think that the takeaway for me for this specific chapter is the argument she makes that it is important for us to look as Jesus as the example and the life that he had and reevaluate whether we are accepting a different perspective of Jesus that has been imposed or given to us by other people, by other doctrines, by other belief systems, by other conditions. And for us to set that aside if that is not fulfilling us. If that works for us, great, embrace it. But if we want to become this new level of humanity, this new generation, if we want to really improve ourselves, we ought to go back to his life as an example, study that, and see how that has the power to change our perspectives. And I think the main takeaway from that is Jesus always spoke to the immortal spirit first. And so, can we focus our attentions and our lives and what we do in the immortal spirit that we are and that our neighbors are? Can we make choices based on that perspective? When we do, we'll be Christifying ourselves. We'll be closer to being deities. We'll be closer to becoming more human and more spiritual. And I think that is what I hear from this chapter is Jesus is that living model because he lived through it, not just because he said beautiful things, but because he lived it. And so, can we live that in our lives too?
Thank you, Dan. Sylvia, I'm coming to you for your closing remarks.
Um, Yes, I mean, I haven't much to say. I talked a lot. But I feel that this chapter is very, very important, to read it again and again and get some things, because I think one of the things that Jesus, his humility, it's incredible. And I think that's one of the things we need to learn, because being the being that he was, he was superior, and it's still, he's the most, I mean, Joanna talks about that. Jesus was the most important spirit that ever came to this earth. And yet, when people were superior, his conversation with Pilate, when he talks, "Oh, are you the king?" And he says, "You say that I am the king." I said, "Why don't you going to defend yourself?" And he is quiet. He doesn't say anything. And he said, I can free you. And he said, "You would have no power if my father had not given you the power." So he never made himself important or big. He was just ordinary, like everyone, isn't it? And I think that sometimes we are not. And if there is anything, it's a little bit of humility. And, going back to what you said before about submission, that's it. Submission to be submissive to our pride, our selfishness, and to be truthful, love. And if other people do things, it's their problem. We will only answer for ourselves, once we go to the spiritual world and we return home, because all of us we will only answer for ourselves. And I think this submission and follow the example of Jesus is in his humanity, in his love for us as one of us. And I think that's one of the most important points, his love for us as one of us. That's so.
Thank you. Is there anyone in our group that would like to share what you're taking out from this learning from tonight? You want to share with the group before we close our meeting? Any insights or remarks from anyone? No? Okay, so what I would say then, I will say thank you very much for everyone who has been watching us, for listening to us. Our next study group is on the 25th of June. The topic is Jesus and Love. Please come and join us and bring your reflections. Thanks for being part of this study group, and I see you soon. Bye for now.